Your Excellency, President Mahama, welcome. Later on, we'll be joined by Her Excellency Dr. Dlamini Zuma, former chairperson of the African Union Commission, and now Minister of the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. But I would also like to welcome her special advisor who's here. The esteemed ladies and gentlemen, and the youth of our country and continent, good morning to all of you. Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First, what I would want to do is, after I've just introduced the subject properly, I'll quickly ask each one of the members to first introduce themselves very quickly, their names, where they come from, what they are going to do. And then after that, we'll start with the special advisor, move that way. And a second round, we'll move from there to here. Clear? I must note that the balance here is not very correct. We note, right? The balance here is not right, but we'll correct it another time. Thank you very much. A quick glance at the history of liberation movements across the world, whether successful or not, does reveal that the enemy of the freedom of the masses of people is always relentless and always can be resilient in seeking the means and implementing those means to ensure that it can defeat the objectives of the revolution. If we look at what happened before and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, especially on the African continent, we must note that after the most protracted struggles of the masses, and even during those struggles, the tide can turn against national revolutions and counter it. This has happened in Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, Ghana itself, Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and now it is happening in our very country, South Africa. After 1994, we did believe that we defeated the apartheid regime. We also believed that the threat to the gains of national democratic revolution could be from outside of our movement only. Objective reality has indicated that while it is true that that threat can come from outside of the movement, it can also be from within the movement, as executed by the enemy agents who have been infiltrated by the apartheid security and intelligence forces to undermine the cause of our movement. The case in point here is how this has happened and is happening here in our country. Based on the results of the retired Judge Nugent, as veterans of our struggle, we have produced a document which clearly indicates how counter-revolution has been concluded and conducted in our country. We must shift our focus from just looking at corruption. Sorry, please. We must shift our focus from just looking at corruption, and this is not to undermine the impact and effect of corruption on the national revolution. Corruption is the iceberg, tip of the iceberg of a much, much deeper and greater problem, grave problem, which we must find a manner to address currently in our country. We have stated as veterans in our document, backed by the Nugent report, how the resources of the revolution have been deliberately and consciously denuded in the South African revenue services and other state-owned organizations to destroy the gains of the national revolution and entrench counter-revolution in the past 10 years in our country. This as a contribution to the lessons for Africa we want to create, the Africa we want to live in. The document will be distributed to the organizers of this conference, because I'm sure they would have the list of the participants so that it can reach the people who, the participants in this thing. Without waste of time, and also just to state that when the minister comes in, we'll take a break so that she can settle down, and once she's settled down, we'll continue, and after that, she can then take the platform to continue with the round table. Let me call the special advisor to the minister to take the floor, the podium. Thank you very much.
Never did I think before that Uncle Wale would be introducing me. You see, I grew up in Zambia, and Uncle Wale was one of those people that we all revered, because if you didn't speak proper English, you would know where the whip is coming. So I hope I don't disappoint Uncle Wale. President Mahama, I must extend the apologies of my minister. She is now the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. It's a portfolio, sir, that you're very familiar with, having been a Minister of Local Government, so you know the intricacies of that. But she has assured us that she will try and make some time to come through here. Fortunately, the assignment that we are dealing with is here in this very city, so hopefully we'll be able to have it through. Members of the academia, the youth, fellow Africans, I've already extended the apologies of my minister. She did really wish to participate in this gathering. When we had the African Union, one of the first things that she did was to ensure that before every summit, we promote something that she called an intergenerational dialogue. Because if we are planning a future for Africa, and there's a saying that the disabled people of South Africa utilize, nothing about us without us. So I'm quite certain that she'd have loved to participate here fully over the past 2 days. Her Excellency recalls that, as you will also recall, that the first Pan-African conference was hosted on the exact dates of this conference, from the 23rd to the 25th of July in 1900 in London. The conference followed centuries of oppression and subjugation, which received formality and agency at the Table of Berlin in 1885. It is common knowledge that the Berlin Conference divided our beloved continent into illogical territories that parted families, clans, and nations into less productive and less prosperous and sustainable units. The agency of the colonial projects was brought to full formality through that conference. Following centuries of loose proclamations and policies, which included various and ridiculous and mindless pseudo-policies such as unjust land acquisitions, as well as heart and cattle taxes, to name a few, all of which were designed to force Africans out of a productive and meaningful life into a meaningless life of servitude. By design, these policies were complemented by the Christianization and Westernization of many Africans, so they may also abandon their culture, sense of community, and heritage. The colonial project was calibrated on the desire to suppress and undermine African culture, heritage, religion, and identity, whilst also retarding our development as nations. The early colonizers marveled in total disbelief as they looked at the artistic and architectural prose of great cities and buildings such as the pyramids of Giza and Sudan, which had majestically towered over the world over 4,000 years. There were also trading posts such as the seaside hub of Carthage in Tunisia, which was founded around the 8th century before Christ, and the ancient stacked enduring granite of the Great Zimbabwe. Together, these cities housed over 600,000 inhabitants, and much can be found of them, including the remains of artifacts such as Chinese pottery, Arabian glass, and European textiles. There are spectacular stone obelisks at the Kingdom of Aksum of the 2nd century in Ethiopia, with gold and ivory, which was a vital link between ancient Europe and the Far East, long before globalization made it into the common lexicon. Distinguished panel participants, it is therefore no exaggeration when we say the colonial projects, by propping up and investing heavily in Western-oriented values, cultures, religions, and identity, retarded our development as a people and nations. From a social cohesion perspective, the colonial project sought to produce fragmented communities whose victims are on either side of the liberation movement. Unfortunately for the colonial project, the cultural assimilation and total clampdown of the masses had the consequence of strengthening and spurring on various resistance and liberation movements, which united across the seas and oceans to pursue the objective of total emancipation. To put it in the words of Webb Du Bois, who was a Pan-Africanist and a participant in the first Pan-African Conference, those movements sought to ensure, and I quote, the liberty of all men, and I add, and women, the space to stretch their arms and their souls, the right to breathe, the right to vote, the freedom to choose their friends, enjoy the sunshine, and ride the railroads, uncursed by color, thinking, dreaming, working as they will in a kingdom of beauty and love. That rallying point holds for us many lessons and is the subject of this panel discussion on African liberation movements and lessons for the Africa we want. We wish to isolate just 5 key lessons from that. From a South African perspective, the rallying point of the first Pan-Africanist Conference was informed by various resistant battles and wars, including those of Isandlwane, Hintsa, Bambata, Sekhukhune, and many, many others. These would lead to the eventual formation of many liberation movements, including Africa's oldest liberation movement, the African National Congress. Ironically and fittingly, the ANC was launched in a church in Mangaung, and with the participation of most of our traditional leaders and representatives from throughout Southern Africa. The African, after centuries of disparate resistances here and abroad, finally came to the conclusion that it was only through a united front that they could defeat the unjust system of colonization, apartheid, and discrimination. The ultimate objective was that Africans may find their place in the sun amongst the nations of the world, as put by John Langalibalele Dube, the first president of the African National Congress. With that emerges the first lesson from our liberation movements, and that lesson is the lesson of unity. The first half of the 20th century until the end of the Second World War in 1945 was marked by the rise of new formations of African nationalism and new resistance forms of resistance. This was aptly summarized by Pixley Gaseme, and he says, the African already recognizes his anomalous position and desires a change. The brighter days upon Africa. Already I seem to see her chains dissolved, her desert plains red with harvest, her Abyssinia and her Zululand, the seat of science and religion, reflecting the glory of the rising sun from the spires of the churches and universities, and the Gambia full of commerce, and I close the quote. This influenced our people here and in the diaspora. Indeed, although it would take decades, the sun did rise, in what we now know as the first wave of freedom, where in the 1950s and 60s, starting with Ghana, more than 19 new states were born and 19 new magnificent African flags were raised to salute independence. African unity African unity also informed the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963 towards an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens, representing a dynamic force in the international arena. At this inaugural gathering, Kwame Nkrumah delivered his iconic speech where he warned us that, and I quote, "The struggle against colonialism does not end with the attainment of national independence. Independence is only the prelude to a new and more involved struggle for the right to conduct our own economic and social affairs, to construct our society according to our aspirations, unhampered by crushing and humiliating neo-colonialist controls and interferences." Nkrumah further warns that nothing will be availed except the united act of a united Africa. Sadly, we meet here in the city of Tegwini, which together with the surrounding areas recently has been the theater of xenophobic tendencies, which tendencies have largely been directed towards our brothers and sisters from the continent and the developing world. Not only do we hang our heads in shame at these actions, but we recognize them as an emotive and counter-revolutionary force which seeks to undermine our aspirations towards a united, productive, and peaceful continent. We do so with the knowledge that our liberation, independence, and destinies are intertwined with the fortunes of our continent. Through Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, we will redouble our efforts towards a united Africa, with the world and integrated infrastructure linked to its diaspora and with seamless borders. In fact, I think the minister would have emphasized without borders, but anyway, the text says with seamless borders. Herein lies the second lesson from our liberation movements. Without collective actions and the tireless efforts and contribution from our brothers and sisters on the continent and the progressive world, particularly the OAU's Liberation Committee, we would have not gained our political freedom. The Liberation Committee was established with the expressed objectives of the total liberation of Africa from colonialism and racial minority rule on the one hand, and Africa's unity on the other. From the foothill of Mount Kilimanjaro at the headquarters of the Liberation Committee, the light shone beyond the borders of Tanzania to give hope where there was despair, love where there was hate, and dignity where there was only humiliation, as predicted by Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. Herein lies the third lesson. Liberation is a revolutionary act pursued as an act of love towards the securing of the dignity of our people. To recall the words of Che Guevara, who once sought to characterize the qualities of a revolutionary, and I quote, "At the risk of seeming ridiculous, let me say that the true revolutionary is guided by a great feeling of love. It is impossible to think of a genuine revolutionary lacking this quality. This love is not the love for oneself, but the love for one's people." Let me briefly step out of the text that has been prepared. If ever I have to say myself, the greatest love that one has ever received is from women. Yes. Whether it's my grandmother, my mother, my wife, my daughters, that is the true sense and the greatest love. Now, let me return back to the text then, because then we will recognize that revolutionary love, if I say the revolution is driven by love, then women will play an instrumental role in the revolution. Without fear of contradicting myself, we could have not attained our liberation without the leadership and contributions of colossal women such as Mam Charlotte Maxeke, Mam Nomzamo Madikizela Mandela, Mam Miriam Makeba, Queen Zinga, Mam Dorothy Nyembe, and many, many more African women. Herein lies the fourth lesson. The total emancipation of Africa is hinged on the liberation of women. To paraphrase President O.R. Tambo, no spring is present without flowers. Thus, women constitute the flowers of the revolution. Consequently, Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, in its Aspiration 6 envisages an Africa where all citizens are actively involved in decision-making in all aspects, where no child, no women, no men will be left behind or excluded. on the basis of gender, political affiliation, religion, ethnic affiliation, locality, age, or any other factors. Ultimately, without the involvement of our people, especially the youth, in their own development, our liberation would be empty and holds no future prospects. Herein is the fifth and possibly the most important lesson from our liberation movements in the shaping of our today and the future. It was the Freedom Charter that recognized that there can be no freedom or prosperity, and I quote, until all the people live in brotherhood and sisterhood, enjoying equal rights and opportunities, and that only a democratic state based on the will of all the people can secure to all their birthright without distinction of color, race, sex, or belief. And I close the quote. History also tells us that the only way to build stable, peaceful, and cohesive communities is through respect to human rights, equity, and policies of inclusiveness. In the context of the workplace, this also includes decent work. In the broader context, it also implies inclusive economic growth. Stability requires that there should be a proper management of diversity and that nobody feels marginalized or excluded. As we've seen on the continent, the majority of the conflicts on the continent are not between countries, they are within countries, and in part as a result of the failure of building strong institutions and political institutions, as well as the failure to manage diversity. We must therefore build stable communities. In securing stable communities, we need to mobilize our domestic resources, as there's often a mistaken belief that we can build Africa through overseas development assistance. There is no country that was ever developed by charity. We need to be able to mobilize resources within our countries as well as externally. Consider the fact that approximately $854 billion between 1970 and 2006 has left our continent illicitly. What is of more interest is that close to 65% of those illicit financial flows are channeled through international trade, which is largely private sector driven. The belief that most of the money that leaves illegal our continent is from our government is far from the reality. It is not all businesses that are involved in these illegal activities. That is why we must work with the honest business people. We must make sure we stem that tide and rid our society of these unscrupulous business practices. We must therefore, together with the private sector and government, work together to ensure that we try and curb these outflows and use these funds that belong to the continent for the development of our people. Fellow panelists, a better Africa can only be attained through the reclamation of the African identity. Already many are continuing to misappropriate our identity, culture, designs, and cuisine. You may have seen the so-called international brands utilizing authentic African creations as their own, such as the Basotho blanket. We must base our development on our identity. We have learned, rather painfully, that to effect total domination, colonial regimes ensure that the African culture be distorted, disdained, and disintegrated. Our languages were banished from institutions of learning, isolating parents from their children's education. Our institutions were relegated to photocopies of the colonizers. Our kings became chiefs, our religions superstitions, and our way of life became a taboo. In essence, this project of domination sought to redefine Africa in Western terms. Today's conference must therefore contribute to the implementation of Agenda 2063, the Africa I Want, by finding mechanisms by which we can, 1, redress and repair the socio-economic balances created by colonialism, 2, remember the Balkanized Africa that was originally unified by culture and religious belief, 3, redefine our mission in life, our value systems, and our socio-economic direction, 4, renew our commitment to justice, fairness, and commitment to our rounded lives. Finally, the rebirth of a glorious path by which we can have new lessons. In so doing, we must refocus towards a Pan-Africanist outlook. We must do so cognizant of the fact that a better Africa also requires strong and effective institutions in the public, private, and civil society sectors, wherein there's a full respect of the Constitution and the will of the people prevails. We have seen in some instances where some people or governments want to change the Constitution without any reference to the people. This causes instability. Program Director, as I conclude, we wish to conclude by recalling the words of the great Latin American philosopher Jose Mate, who once said that ideas are invincible, trenches made of ideas are stronger than those made of stones. A just cause, even one buried in the depth of a cave, is mightier than an army. This cause of Pan-Africanism you reignite today is on the right side of history. It is one which our forebears have been acting on since time immemorial. It is mighty and resilient. The sun shall shine on this glorious continent again. The cities of Axum, Giza, Great Zimbabwe, and Carthage, amongst many others, old and new, shall rise to the glory and tower again. Africa shall rid itself of all bondages, including poverty, inequality, and unemployment, as well as underdevelopment. And the aspirations contained in Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, shall become a reality. Aluta continua, asante sana, shukram, merci beaucoup, ngiyabonga.
Thank you, Program Director. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, and more importantly, our youth. I'm Dlo Makura. I represent an institution called Freedom Park in Pretoria. I don't actually have a thoroughly written paper in front of me, but I just have points that I would like to share with you. And these points make reference to, in terms of the theme of this session, the points make reference to, in particular, the African National Congress of South Africa as a leading liberation movement, but not exclusively only ANC. And I also use Freedom Park as an institution which embodies what this session is all about. I think we all concur that the Africa we want is the Africa that is liberated, is the Africa that is united, the Africa that is prosperous, and the Africa that is peaceful. And I would like to use these ideals as important lessons of the liberation struggle movements. The liberation struggle movements, using the perspective of the ANC, the issue of a unity, the issue of solidarity was very important. Either during the time of the colonial period or the apartheid period, the struggle against colonialism, against apartheid, was the struggle that was waged in a united fashion. The success that was achieved was largely because of the solidarity, of the unity, of the liberation movements in South Africa, either in the frontline states, in Mozambique, in Angola, the MPLA, the Frelimo, in Namibia, SWAPO, throughout Africa. The importance of the frontline states, the importance of the SADC countries now, in terms of the unity during the time of the struggle against colonialism and apartheid, especially in South Africa. And of course also the unity for the entire continent, either in Ghana, either in Algeria. The African National Congress had very strong liberation struggle linkages with a number of the African countries and the diaspora including also the international community. So, ladies and gentlemen, just allow me very briefly to use Freedom Park as the embodiment of that lesson that we have derived from the liberation movements, the importance of a united front, the importance of unity, the importance of solidarity, that should not only have happened during the time of the struggle against colonialism and apartheid, but even in the post-colonial period, even in the post-apartheid period, in the period of democratic governance, such ideals are very important, and they are encapsulated at Freedom Park. Now, Freedom Park in Pretoria, it was conceptualized and it was created primarily to honor all heroes and heroines of the liberation struggle. And what I'm saying is very much familiar to some of the distinguished guests amongst us, in particular, Professor Wale Sorote, who was a leading figure in the conceptualization of Freedom Park and the construction of Freedom Park. And Professor Yona Sileti, also as the head of the Heritage Department at Freedom Park, and Professor Sorote as the CEO. So I'm very much thankful that they are here today. And I will have to be very careful to say something which is correct, in terms of conceptualization. But otherwise, the key issue at Freedom Park is that the freedom that we now enjoy came as a result of the united action of all the liberation movements. It was not only the South African liberation movements, but our own liberation movements forged solidarity ties with other similar liberation movements. So at Freedom Park, we demonstrate this kind of unity. We demonstrate this Pan-Africanism that led to the enjoyment of freedom. We demonstrated the African Renaissance that is also a part and parcel of this unity and the importance of the African identity. Now, we do this at Freedom Park in the way in which we conceptualize the liberation struggle as it was waged by the ANC from four distinct and overlapping pillars or approaches. Either you talk about the mass struggle, the underground struggle, the armed struggle, and the international struggle or international solidarity. All those forms of struggle are well captured at Freedom Park. And we celebrate, we recognize the importance of this unity that brought freedom in various ways. Our key elements at Freedom Park are utilized as the embodiment of all these ideals, of all these important lessons that we learned from the African liberation movements. If I take the example of these elements, one of which is isiVivane. isiVivane at Freedom Park is a spiritual home for all the heroes and heroines of the struggles for freedom and humanity. It's a sacred place where we honor the spirits of all these people who died for freedom and humanity. We have the Wall of Names. Currently, our Wall of Names is inscribed with 139,895 names. 139,895 895 names of people we have honored. And we have honored these people throughout the course of history. The main phase being the liberation struggle. But we have also included even the pre-colonial period, the period of genocide, people who were massacred during the time of genocide, of slavery, the period of South African War, of the First and the Second World War, and the liberation struggle. Of this number, 20,567 are located within, are the names located within the liberation struggle, the 4 pillars of the liberation struggle. But I just want to emphasize that in terms of the liberation struggle, when you visit Freedom Park and you look at the wall of names, and you look at the section for the liberation struggle, which deals with international solidarity, that is where you find individuals, leading people who have been honored, who contributed to our own struggle for freedom in South Africa as part of the international solidarity. It means, therefore, that we also acknowledge the unity and the solidarity that was forged during the time of the liberation struggle. And now that we are free, it is important that we recognize and also celebrate that kind of solidarity. We also have another element called the Gallery of Leaders. In the Gallery of Leaders, we don't just honor everybody. We honor exemplary leaders in terms of the liberation struggle. Exemplary leaders. And these are the leaders who have been categorized into 3. It's the national leaders, the South African leaders, it's the continental leaders, and the international leaders. So when you walk in to this conference room, on your right, you are confronted by a written text. I think it's the NRF written text, which is about the celebration of the Africanists. A number of leaders there are honored at Freedom Park. In terms of the continental contribution, we have honored Agostino Neto as an example of Angola. We have honored Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. We have honored Samora Machel of Mozambique. We have honored Amilcar Cabral of Guinea-Bissau, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, a number of leaders, and some of those leaders appear even on that written text. But we've also gone beyond the continent, so that we also honor the contribution made by the diaspora, the African diaspora. W.E. Du Bois, who is also mentioned there, is also honored at Freedom Park. We have honored leaders like Toussaint Louverture of Haiti. Marcus Garvey, who also appears there, is also honored at Freedom Park, as part and parcel of the diaspora and the importance of Pan-Africanism. The Pan-Africanists who contributed to our own liberation struggle. We have honored leaders like Che Guevara, as an example. So our own key elements are the embodiment of what we should do as Africa in terms of the unity, of the solidarity that should continue even in the post-colonial, post-apartheid period. I'd like also to indicate that at Freedom Park we also have the Pan-African Archives. Now, the purpose of the Pan-African Archives is not only just to collect material and archive the material for the future. or for the visitors. We are very much selective. As the name suggests, our own material that we have archived is Pan-Africanist in nature, in terms of content, in terms of themes. So we are very selective. Even the selection of books, the collection of books in the library, as an example. We don't just gather books and then they gather dust in the shelves. We are very much selective so that we are true to these ideals of Pan-Africanism, the ideals of African Renaissance, of the importance of the African identity. We always, and this I think is the phrase that was crafted by Professor Serote, we always indicate that we emancipate the African voice. In other words, we decolonize our own history, our own heritage. And that will be important for the youth in particular. That there is a need for the youth to have a decolonized history, a decolonized heritage. Now, in conclusion, I just want to indicate what is currently happening, which is part and parcel of what Freedom Park is doing in relation to other agencies of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. In 2005, UNESCO initiated an important program called Roads to Independence, African Liberation Heritage Program, in 2005. And that program was adopted by the African Union in 2011. From 2011 onwards, Tanzania, as a leading African country that contributed to the liberation struggle, we were almost citizens of Tanzania during the time of the exile history in various ways. So Tanzania is the convener of this program. But the program is also escalated to the regions. South Africa and where Freedom Park is, we are part and parcel of SADC. So we are working with other SADC countries so that we decolonize our own history, our own culture, from the perspective of the liberation struggle only. So there are volumes and volumes of historical and heritage works which will be produced collaboratively. The most important thing is that we identify key individuals for the liberation struggle so that we create networks. We identify these individuals. We identify sites, either local, provincial, national, or transnational. We identify these sites like Matola, where we have a connection between South Africa and Mozambique. Sites like Mbuzini, where Samora Machel's plane crashed. Like Quito Valley in Angola. Those sites, like the sites in Maseru, in Lesotho, the sites in Gaborone in Botswana, where we have common history and heritage with regard to the liberation struggle as African countries. So we identify those sites, those places, and we document those sites. We produce narratives of the liberation struggle around those sites so that there should be a network of liberation heritage sites and also history. What we celebrate here for instance, about Tata Nelson Mandela, will also be celebrated, for instance, in Algeria, because they have also some kind of important site that they can identify Nelson Mandela with. That project is the project that Freedom Park is heavily involved in. And we have already created links, for instance, as an institution, between Freedom Park and Quito Quinivale Memorial and the Agostinho Neto Memorial, as an example. But this is very much important because what we are doing, we are emphasizing the importance of a unity of purpose, the unity that was forged during the time of the struggle for liberation, and now even in the post-colonial, post-apartheid period, that unity should continue. So ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to use Freedom Park as a launchpad so that I can be able to demonstrate the importance of this lesson that was bequeathed to us by the liberation movements. I thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is, good morning. Did I say good morning or evening? Perhaps I must also say all protocols observed. I'm not going to present a paper. But just to provoke discussions. As an activist from the student movements, from the youth movements. But before I start, I think I must appreciate that, Prof. Kaya, that you came up with this concept of intergenerational engagement, where the elders are talking to the youth. There is a song, I think they listened to it, by Alicia Keys, the young people, and Jay-Z. They call it the Empire State of Mind. And I'm going to read a little bit on it. They talk about New York. They say it's a concrete jungle where dreams are made. There's nothing you can do. New York, these streets will make you feel brand new. Big lights will inspire you. And they go on, they say, New York, New York. But the guy who raps there says, among other things, welcome to the melting pot, corners where selling rock, Africa Bambaataa shit, home of the hip hop. I tried to research it further to say who wrote this song and what does it mean about Africa Bambaataa shit. Because Bambaataa, in the theory of our revolution, is someone that we truly glorify. Because in his first interaction in the wars of resistance, we're told and we've learned that he led a rebellion against the English. he was cornered, and he was beheaded. They came with his head. They showed it to the English generals, but also it was displayed amongst the African tribes in South Africa to say that you dare not rebel against us, because if you do that, this is what we will do. King Bambata. I don't know, sir, whether he's also there in the Freedom Park. But these are some of the things that I'm, taking to the youth to show that some of the things that we glorify in other countries, they're being bastardized. And I think it is your responsibility, and also our responsibility as well, to sanctify our cause of struggle. That was just in opening. The topic that we have been required to deal with is the role of liberation movements. I was also interacting with my colleague here, Sello Tatai, former journalist of SABC. And we are reflecting about the formation of the African National Congress, how it was formed, the reason why it was formed. And we made a reflection on the role of Tsekiso Plaatje, the role of Dr. Silas Mudirmulema, the role of George Muntsiwa. In the book, The Native Life in South Africa by Solomon Tsekiso Plaatje, he is very detailed about the method and the level of betrayal by the British to the South Africans, especially during that war that is now called the South African War, commonly known as the Anglo-Boer War. In the book, he quotes in verbatim the first president of the Union of South Africa, Louis Botha. And he says for them to lose that war, it was because of the assistance that they got from the Africans. It is because of the assistance that they got from the Africans, particularly the Barolong. And he quotes him verbatim. He says Louis Botha said the following: the reason we lost that war is because the Kafirs came to the assistance of the British. In their assistance of the British, the whole war was dark and black. It is the reason that we were overpowered as the Afrikaners. That is why we lost the Anglo-Boer War. But because of that, the British promised the Africans that if you assist us, we will make sure that we give you the land, we'll make sure that you get independence, but only to be betrayed in the Treaty of Vereeniging. But because of that, those leaders, having felt that they were betrayed, they came with the idea of the formation of the African National Congress. I've been told that that I must sum up. So that's why I was just saying that just to highlight the need or the reasons why the African National Congress was formed. But because of time limitations, I think my other colleagues will go on. Thank you very much.
Lawrence, you started by saying you're not going to deliver a paper. And then you must be cut short. No, thank you very much, Chairperson, Tatu Wale Soroti, and to UKZN for the invitation. My name is Oscar van Heerden, and I am associated with a group called the Concerned Africans Forum, which is a subsidiary of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. And really it is a grouping of former ambassadors, of South African ambassadors, and we have the privilege of also John Teshe being part of the group, representing that forum as secretary of the former heads, which gives us some insights into what's going on the continent and so on. We take a keen interest of developments on our continent. So thank you for the opportunity. I just want to mention six points, specifically to the young people in the room. I think the first one, I want to agree with the previous two speakers, that the historic mission of African liberation movements has always been about unity and solidarity. Unity because the unity in Africa is critical given the various historical paths that we have traversed, whether it be slavery, whether it be colonialism, and indeed apartheid. And so the historic mission continues to be about unity. African unity is critical. And together with that is solidarity. Even today, that plays out in a number of forms, whether it is peace-building operations, peacekeeping operations, whether it is about facilitating between warring groups and so on and so forth. We have come up with a motto that says African solutions for African problems. We are tired of relying on the Europeans and the Americans to solve our own problems. So I think that if we talk about the Africa we want, I want to say that we must continue with that historic mission about unity and solidarity. And it's in keeping with the second aspiration of Agenda 2063, where it clearly talks about that unity and that solidarity. The second point, is around a very critical one which often leads to intra-conflict in countries in Africa, and that is that liberation movements were established to transcend ethnic politics and tribal politics. It has been the bane of Africa's post-colonial project that we still have groups that are fighting with each other because one is Christian, the other one is Muslim, this one is a Hutu, this one is a Tutsi, and so on and so forth. So African liberation movements also historically was established to make sure that we transcend far beyond ethnic and tribal politics. And I think that as an organization, we need to, as this conference, re-emphasize that point. My third point, which of course touches on the patron of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, is indeed around African Renaissance. It remains a project of African liberation movements to ensure that Africa rise. And it is not just about technologically, scientifically, but also in terms of ideas, in terms of thoughts, and so forth. It is our time to reclaim our own identity and our own existence. And I think that really is about restoring our dignity as Africans. And that is the third point I want to make. The fourth point is really a story I want to tell you that also I feel has relevance to what we are discussing here. And that is when South Africa celebrated its 10th anniversary of its young democracy, so 15 years ago, we invited many dignitaries. Among them was the late Professor Ali Wazir. Yeah, Mazuri, thank you. And Ali was asked if he has any pearls of wisdom for us as South Africans, given the fact that we are such a young post-apartheid democracy. And he tells the story of the 4 Vs. I apologize for those who might know the story. But he said to us, look, as a liberation movement, the African National Congress, you have been the victims. That is the first V, under colonialism and apartheid. Then you became the victors. That's the second V. You managed to defeat the apartheid system and usher in a new democracy. Now that you are in having the reins of power, you are the vanguard in your country. This is, he says, this is the road that all liberation movements have traveled. And then, unfortunately, he says, let us hope that you don't become the villain, like some of the African liberation movements. They walked that path. So that was his pearls of wisdom, which stuck with me. And I think that if we want to talk about a contribution that African liberation movements have done and have made over the years, it is to avoid that final V, is to remain the vanguard of ideas, to remain the vanguard of transformation and rebuilding, and not to actually become the villain, as is the case, and I'm sure Selo is going to touch on this, the case of ZANU-PF, and many others that we can talk about that has turned out to be problematic to their own people. The 5th issue is really something that I think is close to our hearts as Africans, and that is that when we look at what we have achieved post-colonial, from sort of the 1960s till now, we have really satisfied all the big issues. Most countries on the continent are democracies. There is rule of law. We have organized formations like the African Union with a constitution that we all adhere to, and so on and so forth. So the big issues, and there's a few hotspots, but we are managing it. It's not as bad as it used to be 20 years ago, and so. So the big issues have been dealt with. What now becomes the area of concentration, I put it to conference, is the small issues, the interpersonal, the issues between me and you. That is where we need to now concentrate on to try and consolidate and move forward. About trust and about issues of xenophobia, issues of free movement of peoples, and so on. That interpersonal. And then finally, Comrade Wali, because I see I've run out of time, my 6th issue is this issue of decolonization. I think I want to put it to the youngsters because, you know, the youngsters are so vibrant. They really assume that these are new struggles. They've come up with the idea of decolonization. It has been a debate that has been raging on the continent for many, many decades. I refer, if you are interested, you must go and read about the debates between the Dar es Salaam School and the Makerere Institute. I mean, for years, Ghana is also there in the mix because they don't like to be left out, and so on. But it is a debate that has been going on for a very long time, and so you will learn lots if you go and familiarize yourself with that. And I make this point, Comrade Wali, just to say that those ideas and those debates must indeed continue. And I leave you, when Lawrence talks, and this is my final point, when Lawrence talks of the Bambata Rebellion, you know, in political education, which they don't do nowadays in the ANC anymore, but those days when they used to do it, That was one of the courses you had to do where the lecturer would start by saying, in 1906, there was the Bambata Rebellion. Now, the person who captures that very well, you must take this down, is a communist called Edward Roux. Eddie Roux wrote a book, A Time Longer Than Rope, A Black Man's History. It was banned for many decades, but now it's readily available because we now live in a democracy. So please do go and read that book. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Excellency, His Excellency President Mahama. During our student activism days, when we read the literature of Professor Wali, we always referred to him as Bra Wali. So I struggled to call him Professor Wali. So today I'm going to call you Professor Bra Wali. I'm Sello Tatai. I'm a former journalist for the SABC. My peers in the media industry call me Marikana because I did the Marikana massacre, one of the painful chapters in our post-apartheid history. Our revolutionary duty as young people is to always imagine a continent which espouses selflessness, and also a country or a continent which promotes service to its people without any expectation of material benefit. But I would like to draw a juxtaposition to what I've just amplified through Fanon's Rush of the Earth, particularly on liberation movements. And he says that throughout history and the struggle for independence, liberation movements rally the masses with struggle songs. But beyond the revolution, when you ask them about the economic programs that they are clamoring for, they cannot give you an absolute answer. And this is critical because I've been grappling with understanding the ideological position of liberation movements, because they've been vacillating between two ideological positions. Today, I still don't know what is the ideological position of the ANC in terms of the economy. And one friend of mine made a profound statement on Facebook, and we were arguing about it. He says, no, the ANC does not have an economic ideology. It's a broad church. So that is its ideology. And when you read the history of the Cold War on the continent, you are able to see that liberation movements have been vacillating between the West and the East without consolidating an economic program which is for the development of the continent. And I can count only 3 economic programs, or 2, which leaders of the liberation movements and our forebearers consolidated, which is the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980. And it was a reactionary program because when you read the history about the Lagos Plan of Action, it was in response to the global dynamics which were unfolding at that particular time, particularly the Tina slogan by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, which gave impetus to the neoliberal agenda, which came in the form of structural adjustment programs on the continent. And then you had the NEPAD economic program by President Thabo Mbeki. When he was recalled by the ANC, NEPAD was also recalled. Then you've got the Agenda 2063 program. So since decolonization, our leaders have only gave us 3 economic programs. And none of them are able to find expression on the ground. and maybe we can attribute this to the influence and the hegemony of global capitalism, and how the Bretton Woods institutions continue to dictate to Africans how they must formulate their economic policies. But again, as Africans, are we homogeneous in terms of class analysis and ideological thinking? Do we share common aspirations as Africans? Liberation movements in their nature, they served multiplicity of class interests. Hence, today we are unable to come up with a consolidated economic plan which is going to benefit all. Because when you do that, you'll have a comprador bourgeois class which will tell you that they did not struggle to be poor. And even when you try to come up with an economic program which is going to benefit all, you'll have nationalists who will come with, I don't want to say narrow economic programs, to make our struggle a race question, when it was not necessarily about the race question, but a class question. And we are seeing all of this now in our current discourse through radical economic transformation, which has not been given any ideological context or a class analysis, to say that black people must be empowered economically. But we are not saying which black people. And that is critical, because you can say you are going to empower black people only to serve an elite of black people. And we are seeing these things unfolding through the Zondo Commission and the revelations that are being thinking there at the Zondo Commission. So my parting shot will be, as Africans, how do we see our continent going forward? How do we rally our people to espouse a continent which will consolidate an economic program which can unify us? Is there an economic program which can unite all of us without advocating for a classless society? And even when we advocate for a classless society, do these classes and stratums in our liberation espouse a classless society? So that is fundamental. Thanks, Professor Brawali.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed, Your Excellency. I would like to acknowledge your presence, and thank you very much to KZN University for giving me this opportunity. My name is Lebogang Maruapula. I am from Botswana. I am a youth activist with a specific passion for the empowerment of young women, and I'm currently working in peace building and based in Syria. So I had a few points that I jotted down. I'm not going to speak for two people, I hope. It is very much fitting that we give liberation movements the accolades that they deserve, because after all, there is no African country that is still under colonial rule today because of these liberation movements. Today, I will just share my views through the lens of young women, young African women. While I don't claim to speak for all African youth, I can say that there are lessons that we young people have drawn from liberation movements which still linger on today. I'm therefore very honored to be able just to contribute to this intergenerational dialogue, because it is important for us to bridge the gaps between the generations which have lived through these liberation movements, as such as our esteemed chairperson, who himself was a liberation fighter, a freedom fighter. We can benefit from their shared experiences, their lived experiences, while it's also important for us as young people to share what we experience as a result of those movements. Even after independence through liberation movements, Africa has actually, unfortunately, continued to be marred with poverty, conflict, and socioeconomic inequalities. While all African countries have attained their independence, there have been major inadequacies in leadership towards achieving the Africa that we want. Sadly, there are too many African citizens who are left behind, too many women left behind, too many youth left behind. And if we're talking about some of the lessons, I posit that there is a danger in African liberation movements being so caught up in admiring their historical achievements and defending our statuses, rather than actually developing African countries and the lives of African people. So if we're talking about the lessons and the Africa that we want, we have witnessed how some liberation leaders see the movements that they actually lead as lifelong missions and a way to retain power, and actually dismissing now the terms and limits and other governance structures that are actually put in place and democracy that they have been fighting for. We've also witnessed that even when founded on noble principles and intentions, it is not really a guarantee for liberation movement to now transition into democratic transitional post-liberation movements. So some of these lessons are what we see as young people today. So when we talk about the Africa that we want, the 2063 African Agenda actually seeks to achieve inclusive, sustainable development, unity, self-determination, freedom, and progress and collective prosperity for all. To achieve this, we have seen that more involvement and leadership of young women, of youth, is very imperative. There has been, though, a growing role in the contribution of youth to liberation movements as well. The recent movements, such as the recent 2010 to 2011 Tunisian movement, which is actually led by young people, and actually crystallized the face of women and youth as leaders in liberation movements. And African youth actually represent the next generation that will lead Africa to what we can call its second liberation and take it to the Africa that we want. We have seen how African youth have the power to actually alter political leadership. The likes of the African Union Youth Envoy, Ms. Aya Chebi, who formed the backbone of the Tunisian liberation movement. Recently, we've also witnessed in Sudan, Ms. Ala Salah, who is 22 years old, a young woman who's 22 years old, becoming a symbol and the face of the current liberation struggle that they're undergoing. So the voices of youth are amplified, and this has majorly have been through the power of social media and technology. And when technology and social media, this is what we as young people, we use to communicate. And when it is used in a synergized and organized manner, we are able to actually bridge the gaps from learning from the previous generations, to look into research and learn about the history of African liberation movements, as well as learn lessons from that and take those lessons forward. The prominent thing that we've seen, that in order for us to truly achieve the Africa that we want, we need to bridge the gaps and see that decision makers need to be able to see young people as partners of shared value and not simply as beneficiaries of previous liberation movements. So we as young people are actually partners in taking forward the lessons that liberation movements seek to achieve. So in order for democracy to fully succeed and the objectives of what the liberation movement aimed to achieve, it is important for young people to also take our stand and position ourselves and actually take those lessons forward. I'm not going to speak for 10 minutes because I think there's a second session that is coming up. And with that, thank you very much.
Good morning to one and all. My name is Apil Mkize. I stay in Chatsworth. My school is Wingen Heights in Chatsworth. So what I've learned and what I've noticed here is how we, as the youth and the elders, would mix and revive our continent. So basically, our issues of the continent is mostly xenophobia and etc. So what we need to do is like keep an open mind that we not like our border lines are only the ocean lines like that cover the Africa, not the ones that we see separating the countries like Mozambique, South Africa, etc. And so since the youth of today has been born with technology and growing up with technology, I think that we should like implement and upgrade the culture with the elders, like, so the elders know much of the culture, which is in the past, and we know much of technology, right? So I think that we should like upgrade the culture and roots and make an African culture with all the countries around the continent. So, yeah. So, not really Facebook, because that's chatting and stuff. So, as the elders and the youth mixing together, making like ideas to make it better, the culture, and at the same time, the youth will be learning about the culture of the olden days, making it better for the future. And so I would like to say that since like the Chinese people have done it also, use technology to like upgrade their own like culture, we should like make our own culture as Africans. I want to like see more of African things made, exported out of the continent of Africa. Not seeing things like made from China come in, only like made things made from Africa go out and be exported. Thank you.
I'm most consoled by Apila Mkhize, who is propagating dynamic contact between the young people of the continent and the elders. We must applaud him because that is a very important revolutionary value of our continent. Emanating from the round table this afternoon, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, we are being persuaded by the round table to ensure unity of the continent, to ensure that the African Renaissance and Pan-Africanism as values of our continent are continuously become a reality that we live on the continent, in the diaspora, and internationally. I hope that we can take that as a resolution from this round table, but also please praise them. We are on the dot of time. We performed very well. Thank you very much.